Great, so to support the Australian Liberty Alliance and to listen to Kirralie Smith tonight, who's going to be our Senate candidate for New South Wales, which is pretty fantastic. There'll be some question time afterwards for those that want to ask questions, so when we do, we can line up in the middle here, behind each other, and ask the questions, and Kirralie will answer them. But in the meantime, Kirralie just asked me if I would give you a little bit of an insight into why I joined the Australian Liberty Alliance. So just to give you my feelings on it, I've always been a Liberal Conservative voter all my life, and I don't believe in the left-wing ideology or communist ideology, so I've always been that way, but I've become very disillusioned with our coalition government, especially with the political correctness that's taken over and the nanny state and our freedom of speech being taken away. We've become very much Islamised, and these sort of things really hurt me. 18C was supposed to have been taken away at the end, the promise of the last federal election, and that didn't happen. And to be quite honest, I'm really sick of being labelled a racist, a bigot, and Islamophobe by the left-wing media. And you know, I think the worst thing too with that also, we now have a Prime Minister who's actually a Labourer in disguise as a Liberal. And we're being made to feel ashamed of our culture. And there's a fantastic person in America called Robert Spencer, who actually is the head of Jihad Watch. Not sure if many of you know about it, but he made a fantastic statement that if you are ashamed of your culture, you will not stand and fight for it. So I think those words are very true. And I get very fearful for the family, for my family, your families, for our children, grandchildren that will grow up with under Islam and Sharia law, because mathematically the way it's going is bound to happen unless we stop it. So I came across the Australian Liberty Alliance, and I was really relieved to see a true Conservative party there, you know, one that has the values that I believe in, which is freedom of speech and freedom of the individual. You know, we stand up for our culture. The Liberty Alliance, they're all for the integration, not multiculturalism. Integration is a little bit different, so they're all for that. They're against the Sharia law, so that is a fantastic thing. We want one law only in this country for everybody, in my opinion. I think you all probably feel the same. And the other things that I really feel they're against, which was really good, they've had a lot of success, and thanks to a lot to Kirralie, but the rort of halal certification, and that has meant that we've had to pay at the grocery stores for our normal things that we get, and pay money to Islam, and also some of that funds terrorism. So the ALA's got a fantastic team. We've got Kirralie Smith here in the Senate for New South Wales. We've got Bernard Gaynor in Queensland. We've got Debbie Robinson in Perth. They're fantastic people, and we will have a voice. And just look at Kirralie over here. What a beautiful, smart lady, and who wouldn't vote for her? Kirralie's the head of, she is Halal Choices, and she took it right to the top level, and out of that we got a Senate inquiry, and she was very victorious in that, and I was there and witnessed that it was fantastic. So I think after you see and listen to Kirralie that you'll be like me and you'll say, Kirralie's my hero. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Kirralie Smith.
Well, they were very kind words, Tim. Thank you very much. We had a few technical difficulties tonight. I did have a PowerPoint presentation for you. Now my computer won't accept my password. Just bear with me for 2 seconds. One more go. What is going on? This is embarrassing. There we go. Well, Newcastle. Well, I'm in Newcastle today, aren't I? Yes. It's great to see you all come out on a Tuesday night, and it is a Tuesday, isn't it? Okay. We've been doing a lot of touring and having a lot of fun meeting a lot of like-minded people. people. And I saw a few heads nodding, but I would say that a great majority of people are the disenfranchised Liberal National voters that are coming along, but we're getting others as well, and it's really exciting to meet people. I'm kind of sorry in one sense that it's under these circumstances that we have to meet, that our country has come to this place in history and as a nation. There are some really great concerns that we all hold, and for me, I think the greatest concern I have is the threat of political correctness. I think that it is a very damaging, very insidious, very pervasive disease that's infecting most areas of our culture. And quite frankly, I've had enough, and I'm prepared to stand up and put my money where my mouth is and do something about it. I have 3 beautiful children, 8, 10 and 12, and the dream life for me is to be at home on my 100 acres, raising my children, looking after my animals, growing my crops and supporting my husband in his business. However, we really come to this point after 5 years of doing halal choices, having, 24,000 or so people follow that on Facebook, interacting with people right around the country and coming to the realisation that if I left this for another 5, 10 or 15 years, it will be too late. We need to stand up now for the values of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equality, democracy, and just good old-fashioned common sense, really. We're seeing it go down the tubes. And as I've toured all of northern New South Wales, coastal New South Wales, a little bit of northern inland New South Wales, we've done the city, I meet many people just like yourselves, and it's really interesting that particularly the over 55 say that they're really quite incensed that the media wants to call us far-right extremist or any kind of extremist, really, because what we're standing for is not some radical new idea. It is good old-fashioned common sense and decency. It's what built Australia. It's what this generation of over 55s and my grandparents and beyond worked so hard to fight, defend for and establish in this country. And it makes the values that have been successful in implementing in this country make Australia one of the most desirable places in the whole world to live, and for good reason. And we want to keep it that way. Are you in agreement with me? Yeah. Good. I'm not sure if you're aware, and please forgive me, because if you follow me on Facebook or you've heard any of my speeches, there will be some going over old ground tonight, but I think they're important points to make. And just before we did our national tour 2 weeks ago, where we visited Sydney, Brisbane, Darwin and Perth, we had over 200 people at each event, except for Darwin, which was just amazing and wonderful to have that many people. Maybe some of you are in the same position, but we have many national members in particular, or ex-national members, who tell us they go to meetings and there's very rarely around 20 people at the Nationals meetings. So to have 200 come out for a new political party is a fantastic encouragement. In the lead up to that tour, we attempted to put advertising in with News Limited. We paid a very substantial amount. They accepted our money. Here in Sydney, I give credit to the Daily Telegraph, who ran our ad for 2 days. But in Brisbane, the Brisbane Courier Mail, I believe it's called, and is it WA Today, I think might be the name of their publication in Perth, refused outright to run our ad. Our ad, you've possibly seen something similar, does have the blue banner, "We will stop the Islamisation of Australia," had my face, Debbie Robinson, Bernard Gaynor, the tour dates, and Australian Liberty Alliance. And the reason they gave us for rejecting our advertising was that it didn't fit their brand. Didn't fit their brand.
Awesome.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I was under the understanding when you pay for advertising, you're trying to promote your brand. Yeah? Okay. So we got some of that money back, not all of it, a portion of that money back. So they were happy to take some of our money for 2 days of advertising and rejected the rest. And it's a very sad indictment of the state that we're in today when what has been traditionally a conservative news outlet is refusing to just promote national tour dates. We're seeing political correctness in so many areas. A couple of weeks ago, we saw Senator Cory Bernardi's office completely trashed by left-wing thugs who, under the guise of protesting and because of an anti-bullying program, put on one of the greatest displays of bullying that this country has ever seen. Cory's wife and his staff had to barraged themselves in a back room. The office was trashed, papers put everywhere, furniture destroyed, and disgusting graffiti written all over the walls and outside on this heritage building, all in the name of tolerance. And yet it was an incredibly intolerant display. Some of the mainstream media picked up on that, but not all, and not all condemned it. And in fact, if you're on Twitter, you're suffering and you're punishing yourself, but if you're on Twitter, there are even people defending the left-wing socialist thugs who behaved in such a way. We need to stand up and we need to expose these things for what they are. I am encouraged though, and I want to share with you that we've had some little wins when it comes to fighting political correctness, and we have to stand on those victories and go beyond those things. We were talking over dinner with the fact that in mainstream media for many, many years we were sold the lie, or I never bought it, and I imagine that some of you didn't either, that Islam is a religion of peace. Now, that's not being trotted out very often anymore, is it? We're not hearing that line that Islam is a religion of peace, because the reality is it's not a religion of peace, and the mainstream public don't buy that anymore. For a number of years, even here in Australia, we were told that terrorist attacks were carried out by lone wolves. Well, we're not hearing that rhetoric so much anymore either. The narrative is having to change because we are standing up and saying, no, that is not the case. I was disappointed yesterday morning. I don't have a television at home, and I'm quite happy not to. I think there's so much rubbish on there. But as we've been touring, we've been staying with people who do have television, and we woke up and turned on the news yesterday morning before we were setting off for our next venue up in Penrith. And Channel 9 were all, up in arms, and lots of coverage of the Brussels riots by the far right-wing extremists and all the water cannons that were out, and that was well known on Channel 9. Then we got in the car, not 2 minutes later, and heard the horrific news about what had happened in Pakistan. 67 Christians slaughtered at an Easter event because they're Christians. Now, I know as the day went on, the mainstream media reported on it, but they weren't reporting on it first thing in the morning because they have to, have a go at those right-wing extremists before they do that. But last week we saw Andrew Bolt and Steve Price do a bit of a turnaround. Some of you followers of those guys, a few heads nodding, you might have heard them in November say that they talked about Australian Liberty Alliance, they were talking about Gert Wilders, they were saying that basically what has to happen is we are to have no oxygen, that LNP need to take the wind out of our sails by taking some of our good policies and taking them on board so that there's no purpose for us to exist. Now, as a result of that, I found a lot of the media wouldn't talk to us. I would go and have lots of cups of tea, outside News Corp, there's a little cafe. I've spoken to many journalists, editors, including Chris Kenny and Piers Ackerman and some of those guys, and having a cup of tea, they're all for us, let me tell you. They're all in agreement with many of our policies, but none were very brave. Well, I shouldn't say none were very brave. Piers Ackerman has mentioned us a number of times, and so has Chris Kenny's had me on his program. It's a bit tough, but Paul Murray's had me on his. But what we saw in the last week with the Brussels event was that Andrew Bolt and Steve Price did a bit of a turnaround, and they invited our President Debbie Robinson onto the program. They finally gave in to the fact that I imagine even some of you have left comments on their pages about ALA, and they've listened. And twice in that program, Andrew Bolt suggested that people download our manifesto and read the policies because they're not too bad. So, and as a result, the Courier Mail, the same one that refused to advertise it, actually reported on ALA on the weekend, and so did the Australian. So I'm telling you these things to encourage you and to say, I'm here, I'm persistent. I am a dog with a bone. I've proven that through Halal Choices for 5 years now, and I'm going to do the same thing with Australian Liberty Alliance. I am a voice, perhaps maybe a bit of a face for ALA, but you know what? You guys are the body. The supporters are the ones that we need to be the feet and hands of Australian Liberty Alliance. We need you on social media making those comments, calling up Talkback Radio and discussing the policies of Australian Liberty Alliance. We need letters to the editor, we need pamphlets in letterboxes and all of those things because we need to do this together. The media is not going to give us a clear run, but we will keep doing everything that we can to get our message out there, and it is getting out there. Unfortunately, we did see, just over a week ago now, another terrorist event in Brussels, and I don't know about you, but my heart doesn't get any more hard towards those events. The more that they happen, the softer my heart is becoming, the more it upsets me, the more tears that I do cry when I look at my children. And, you know, my son, when the Paris event happened, he's 12 years old and loves soccer, absolutely soccer mad. Newcastle's his team, he just loves them. And he was devastated that a bomb went off in a soccer stadium in a game between Germany and France. These things are affecting us, whether we like it or not. And Bill Muhlenberg is a blogger. Are any of you familiar with him? He wrote a really good article just after that. But I wanted to highlight some things that he just pulled out some of the major events just to remind us of what's been going on around the globe, to reinforce, and we all know this, these are not lone wolf attacks, they're not isolated events. They are a part of a coordinated, strategic plan to establish the caliphate and to establish terror in the hearts of unbelievers. We know obviously September 11 is where the modern attack on the West, I guess you would say, was birthed. But after that we had the October 2002 Bali bombings, the October 2002 Moscow theatre hostage crisis, the March 2004 Madrid train bombings. Like, we've crossed continents just with those three already. In 2004 September, the Beslan school hostage crisis. In July 2005, the bombings in the London Underground. In March 2010, the Moscow metro bombings. In April 2013, the Boston Marathon bombings. In September 2014, the Endeavour Hill stabbings in Melbourne. December 2014, the Sydney hostage crisis in the Lindt Cafe. January 2015, Charlie Hebdo and the other Paris attacks. And October 2015, the Parramatta shooting here in New South Wales. 2015 November, St Denis and Paris attacks again, and now we can add Belgium and Lahore to those lists. Now they're just a snapshot of what's gone on in the last 10 to 15 years when it comes to Islam around the world. It's reported that there's been over 28,000 Islamic attacks, specific Islamic attacks. That's not how many people have suffered, that's not how many people have died, that's in the hundreds of thousands. Millions have been affected by Islamic terrorism around the world in the last 10 to 15 years. In fact, throughout history since Islam began. But what I want to do by highlighting those things is to reinforce to us that this narrative is being framed in Australia as good Muslims or bad Muslims, or, you know, this or that. It's not about that. The reality is all of those events, everything that's going on with Islamisation is religiously endorsed, promoted, incited and encouraged through the Quran, the Hadiths and the example of Muhammad himself. And very few, if any, commentators are prepared to go there. We have all these de-radicalisation programs and anti-terrorism experts, and yet all we need to do is go to the texts themselves to discover that that's where all the incitement comes from, that's where all the encouragement comes from. And until we have an honest conversation about these things, we're not going to get very far, and we're going to see more of those terrorist attacks, more violence, more division in our shores. Even if you don't want to go to, you know, let's say the extremes with Islamisation, we are seeing the effects of that in Australia every single day. Islam is divisive. It is not Australian Liberty Alliance that's divisive. It's not conservative Australian voters who are divisive. It's not right-wings or right-wing extremists who are divisive. It is Islam that is divisive. Islam divides Muslims and non-Muslims. Islam divides men against women, halal versus haram, clothing in whatever way, swimming pools, you name it. It is Islam that is divisive, and it is time we turn the tables and shine the light back on the truth of this matter. Multiculturalism has been a failure. Multi-ethnic integration has been a success. We have I think we're one of the best models of this in the whole world, perhaps besides Israel. We've demonstrated over and over again that we can be open, tolerant, accepting. When communities come into Australia and decide integration over separation, whether you choose Vietnamese, Greeks, Lebanese, the list goes on and on and on. But what we're seeing with multiculturalism, where divisiveness is encouraged, where segregation is encouraged, where enclaves are formed, it is a threat to Australia's security and to our future. The problem is we have in this country today hundreds of mosques. You've got mosques here in Newcastle. There's more that are wanting to be built in the area. Curry, is that? Yeah, Buchanan. And what do they do in a mosque? They teach the Quran. They exemplify Muhammad's life. Those things ought to be extremely concerning for every single Australian citizen. And Australian Liberty Alliance has practical steps to counter those things and to stop those things, to address those things, and to ensure that, for a start, public funding is not going to be used and misused in those places. We are going to highlight the fact that when it comes to the major world religions, you've got Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism and Islam. But Islam is not in the same category of these other four. These other four are primarily concerned with acts of service and worship, and that's it. There's no imposition of cultural practices. There's no, everybody's got to do what we do. There's no parallel legal system that's wanting to be implemented. With Islam, you have that parallel legal system. You have military aspirations. You have political aspirations. It is so much more than acts of worship or service, and it must be exposed for what it is. The Australian Liberty Alliance wants to see all religious organisations go through an accreditation process if they are to get any public funding at all, and it all needs to be completely reassessed.
Pay taxes for a start.
Absolutely. I'm happy to field some questions more specifically about those things at the end, but I'm trying to give you a broad stroke picture of what we're about. Our number one policy in our manifesto is for smaller, smarter government. As you know, we have a national debt that is out of control, a deficit that's not going to be reined in by increasing taxes. That's not going to happen. Penalising responsible, contributing citizens to this country by raising taxes isn't going to solve our national debt problems, and nor is it going to increase our social cohesiveness. We need to address government spending from the top down. We've all had enough of the political elite abusing and misusing the system. There are so many examples, but the one I obviously like to use is the Senate inquiry that Tim mentioned last year, where you have tens of thousands of your money, my money, being spent on this inquiry. 6 months of that inquiry. There's senators involved who never even showed up to any of the hearings. I don't know if they read any of the 1,500 submissions, and by the way, that's one of the largest amount of submissions to any Senate inquiry in Australia's history. We have Senator Sam Dastyari, who played on his devices throughout all of the hearings and showed great contempt to the people who made very serious submissions and were giving very serious evidence by tweeting that he was fed up with the racist dog whistling going on around halal and not taking our concerns seriously.
Well, he would, wouldn't he?
6 months of that, 6 months. The government, then there was a Senate report handed into the government in December. Some of the recommendations, if you've read them, are reasonable and a good start. Not the good finish, but they're a good start. And that is that there should be labelling of not just, your Kit Kats and your Mars bars and those sort of products, but labelling of all meat. So if it has been religiously slaughtered, whether you're getting it here in the club, at Coles, Woolies, the butcher shop, or in any restaurant, the consumer has a right to know whether or not that product has undergone any sort of religious slaughter and if fees have been paid. So that's a really good aspect of the recommendations, and also that there should be more government regulation to take out the ability to profiteer. There's monopolies that are being formed. There are Australian businesses that are suffering, and our media chose not to report on any of those things that came out of the Senate inquiry. That report was handed in December. They had 3 months to respond. Well, those 3 months have come and gone. I know that the report is before Christopher Pyne, and it is also before some other MPs. I have rung them every week for the last 3 weeks to ask them when they're going to respond to those recommendations, and I get the usual, soon. Well, I just want to be assured that I'm not going to back down on this. We've done a lot of work, but there has been tens of thousands of dollars spent on this inquiry, and soon is not a good enough response to the money that has gone into this. We want to see senators doing their job, not getting paid. I believe that to chair a committee, you get about $30,000 extra on top of your $200,000 wage as a senator. Those sort of expenses must be reined in. The ability to access pensions or superannuation is not the same. It's not consistent with any other industry when it comes to politics. So we say one law for all, no Sharia law, but we also say one law for all, including politicians. Would you like to see that?
Kirralie.
I will do questions and answers at the end, just let me get through, sorry. So that's just one small example of wasteful government spending, but we've got things like $1 billion being invested into climate change, but not 1 cent of that $1 billion is actually going to affect the climate at all. That is wasteful government spending. I'll start to wrap up by, Tim did mention some of the candidates. I want to give you a little bit more of a picture of Australian Liberty Alliance and what's happening right now and what will happen and how you can be a part of it, and then I'll take some questions. We do have, obviously, myself here in New South Wales. By the time the election is called, I will also have at least one running mate to announce, so that we'll have a group ticket, which is really exciting. The same for Bernard Gaynor in Queensland. Debbie Robinson, also in Western Australia, has Dr. Marion Hercock standing with her. She's a brilliant adjunct professor who is very passionate Australian and a great speaker, and you can find out more about her through our website and on the Facebook pages. John Bolton has also joined us in South Australia. He's a lawyer, an ex-police force member, and a great guy. And again, you can find out some more information about him. And we're hoping to announce our Victorian candidate very soon as well. Our aim is to have candidates in every state and territory by the time the election is called. And there will possibly be some House of Representative candidates. Now, we get asked a lot, why aren't you doing that? The bottom line is when I speak to some of the MPs, especially the Nationals MPs, I'm a regional Australian, and they tell me that they have a budget of about $250,000 to $500,000 just for a local electorate campaign. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds extremely wasteful as well. That's a lot of money. When you multiply that by 150 electorates, and we're not talking the Liberals and Labor Party here, that's the Nationals. I don't think their budget would be quite as big as the Liberals and the Labor Party. So for us to run lower house candidates and to compete with that sort of thing at this stage is not the best use of our resources. The best use of the resources for Australian Liberty Alliance is to get some Senate representation this election, and then for the next 3 years focus really hard on getting quality candidates who are going to represent you at that House of Representative levels. So one of the reasons I'm here tonight is to encourage you to think about your local electorate, to think about how you can get involved. We want to have regional support groups that will then become electoral support groups. We want you to consider being a part of that. And those groups will be responsible for things like letterbox drops and how to vote cards on election day, but it will also be about fundraising, strategically helping to get the Senate candidates elected, and more importantly in the coming years, you know your communities far better than I do, and it will be about identifying and putting forward suitable candidates for the next election. So that's something I really want you to think about. There's membership forms on your chairs that you can fill in tonight if you haven't already done so, and that gives you access into the heart of ALA, where you can be a part of making a difference and standing up for these conservative values that we want to protect and promote in Australia. And obviously the next question I always get is, what about the Senate voting reform? How does that affect you? We're not worried about the Senate voting reform. It had to happen. Whether this is the best reform or not can be debated, long and hard, and that's fine. But the reality is that for senators to be elected on less than 500 primary votes is not acceptable. That's not a fair representation of Australians. And Australian Liberty Alliance never began with the idea of doing backroom preference deals or anything else. We always stand and will stand believing that we represent a large number of Australian voters, and that's how we want to get in, not with backroom deals, not with preferences. So the bottom line is preferences for the Senate have been abolished. There's no such thing. So when people ask me now, but where are your preferences going? I would really like all Australians to understand they're going where you put them, okay? You now vote 1 to 6 above the line. You decide where the preferences go, and you can also vote at least 1 to 12 or more below the line. Preferences are now in your hands. They're not in any party's hands whatsoever. We can and will give you some suggestions of how to vote, but it's up to you, okay? But there will be no more preference deals. We're not worried. It's going to be all right. But this is where I'm saying we need hands and feet. We need to promote these values. I can stand here and talk till I'm blue in the face, and I will, because I like to talk, and I'm very passionate about these things. But without us all working together, we're not going to get very far. But I will encourage you tonight by letting you know that the membership of Australian Liberty Alliance has more than quadrupled since we had Gert Wilders here in October. I don't think many other parties can say the same thing, so that's, And for former Prime Ministers such as Tony Abbott to, say a number of times, oh, we're not worried about the other Conservative parties, we're not worried about Australian Liberty Alliance, and not mention any other party, I think that says volumes. I think there is a great concern. And I've over the years through Halal Choices, built some great relationships with MPs and senators. There's not many I have a lot of respect for, but there's a handful. And they tell me that so many of their supporters have said, and even in my area, have said, they might still vote for Liberal Nationals in the lower house. Many are saying they won't, but they're telling their National and Liberal members that they are voting for me in the Senate. I get emails every day where it's to Turnbull or to whoever, Barnaby especially, but I get CC'd into all of those emails, and so many people are saying the same thing. And I get those MPs ringing me saying, had another member drop out today to join you guys. I know, we've had whole branches, in fact. Whole branches of Libs quit or Nationals quit and come and join us and offer us their services. Policy advisors, the whole lot. So it's exciting, and we're growing. You might not see everything on social media all the time, you might not see it all in the news, but it's happening. So I encourage you, and I want to tell you that I'm really encouraged that you're here tonight. So I thank you for that bit of time, and I'm happy if you want to line up and I'll answer some questions.